The third time my lunch vanished, I didn't curse or slam the fridge door like a normal person would. Instead, I just stood there frozen, staring at the empty space where my food should have been, feeling this slow, humiliating realization crawl up my spine that someone in this office wasn't just stealing lunches. They were choosing victims, and somehow, without ever saying a word to me, they had decided I was one of them. In that moment, with the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing above my head and coworkers laughing somewhere behind me, I knew this wasn't a harmless mistake anymore. This was intentional, calculated, and cruel in the quietest way possible. If you've ever been ignored by HR, dismissed by management, or made to feel like your problems don't matter because they're too small, then you need to hear this, so hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me. Because this story isn't just about revenge. It's about what happens when someone pushes a regular person too far and then acts shocked when there are consequences. I worked in a massive office building, the kind of place that looks impressive from the outside, but feels completely soulless once you're inside. Endless rows of gray cubicles, stale recycled air, carpet that had seen better decades, and employees who had perfected the art of polite indifference. Everyone shared the same break room, the same fridge, the same microwave that smelled like burned popcorn and leftover fish. And because no one truly felt ownership over anything, no one respected anything either. It was in that break room where the rumors first began. Quiet at first, almost playful. Someone mentioning that their lunch had gone missing. Another person joking about an imaginary office raccoon. Laughter covering irritation, because nobody wanted to admit how violating it felt to open a fridge and realize something meant for you was gone. At first, I didn't take any of it seriously, because in a big office, mistakes happen all the time. Brown paper bags look identical. Plastic containers are all the same brand, and people rush through their day on autopilot. I told myself someone probably grabbed the wrong lunch and didn't realize until it was too late. Or maybe someone genuinely thought it was theirs, opened it and felt too embarrassed to admit the mistake. I'd even done it myself once or twice, grabbing a bag, noticing immediately it wasn't mine, and putting it back without touching anything. So when my lunch disappeared for the first time, I just sighed and moved on, mildly annoyed but not suspicious. But it didn't stop with me, and it didn't stop with one person either. Every day it seemed like someone new was complaining. Voices getting sharper, jokes disappearing, irritation replacing humor. And eventually enough people were fed up that they went to HR. That should have been the moment things changed. But HR brushed everyone off with polished smiles and corporate phrases that sounded helpful but meant nothing. And honestly, at the time, I still thought everyone was overreacting. Because I believed systems worked, I believed adults followed rules, and I believed no one would be stupid enough to keep stealing once attention was drawn to the issue. Then my wife enrolled in an online French cooking class, and without exaggeration, my lunches went from forgettable to extraordinary almost overnight. She threw herself into that class with passion, learning techniques, perfecting sauces, experimenting with flavors. And every night our kitchen smelled like something out of a high-end restaurant. She packed the leftovers for me each morning like it was an act of love, carefully sealing containers, reminding me to reheat gently. And suddenly lunchtime became the highlight of my workday, a small bright moment in an otherwise dull routine. For 2 or 3 weeks nothing happened, and I started to think maybe the lunch thief had moved on, or maybe the rumors were exaggerated after all, until one afternoon I opened the fridge and my lunch was gone. That time it hurt more than it should have. Not because I was starving, but because I knew exactly what I was missing. I could picture it perfectly. The smell, the texture, the effort that went into it. And for a brief moment I just stood there hoping I was wrong, hoping it was on another shelf, hoping I just overlooked it. Even then I tried to be reasonable. telling myself someone probably grabbed it by accident, realized how good it looked, and made a selfish decision to keep it, calling them an asshole in my head but still letting it go, telling myself it wasn't worth getting upset over. The next day, though, I wrote my name on the bag in big bold letters, feeling faintly embarrassed for doing it but also weirdly protective. And when I came back at lunchtime and found it gone again, that's when denial started cracking, because accidents don't happen twice in a row like that. On the third day, I didn't even trust the fridge anymore. I kept my lunch at my desk, eating earlier than I wanted just to avoid spoilage. And even that didn't stop it. I stepped away for only a few minutes, and when I came back, the bag was gone. And I remember just standing there staring at my empty desk, feeling this mix of anger and disbelief, because now there was no excuse left, no way to explain it away, no comforting lie to tell myself. My desk sat in a central area where people walked by constantly, which meant whoever took it wasn't hiding. They weren't scared. And they weren't worried about being seen. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew no one would challenge them. That realization changed everything, because it meant this wasn't random theft, it was targeted. And I was being tested to see how much I'd tolerate. That's when I finally went to HR and explained everything in detail, calmly at first, laying out the pattern, the escalation, the certainty that this was intentional. And they listened with that practiced corporate expression that looks like concern but feels like distance. When they responded that employees' lunches are personal property, and the company is not responsible for lost or stolen personal items, something inside me quietly broke, because in that moment, I understood that no one was going to protect me. No one was going to intervene. And as far as the system was concerned, this was my problem alone. Walking back to my desk that day, I felt smaller than I ever had at that job, hungry, embarrassed, and weirdly ashamed for caring so much about something everyone else dismissed. But what I didn't realize yet was that this dismissal was planting the seed for something much bigger. Because when people learn that rules don't apply and authority doesn't care, they stop asking for help and start figuring things out themselves. And that's exactly where this story truly begins. By the time HR told me my stolen lunches were my personal problem, it wasn't just hunger I was dealing with anymore. It was humiliation. The kind that settles quietly in your chest and makes you question why you even bother following rules when the people enforcing them clearly don't care. And standing there holding that frustration inside, I had no idea this was only the beginning of how far things were about to spiral. After HR brushed me off, the thefts didn't slow down, they accelerated. And that's what hurt the most, because it felt intentional. Like whoever was doing this knew I had complained and was daring me to do something about it. Every morning I'd walk into the office already tense, already anxious, my eyes drifting to the fridge before I'd even taken my jacket off. And every lunchtime felt like a gamble, like I was spinning a wheel to see whether I'd eat that day or not. Coworkers started noticing the change in me, the way I'd hover near the break room, the way my mood would crash around noon, the way I stopped joking and started isolating myself. But no one ever asked why, because in offices like that it's easier not to know. One day that stupid memo appeared in the break room, taped crookedly near the fridge, reminding everyone to check the names on their lunch bags, and standing there reading it, knowing exactly why it existed while HR pretended it had nothing to do with me. I felt this deep burning anger rise in my throat. It wasn't the memo itself, it was the cowardice behind it, the way they refused to acknowledge the real issue, refused to call it theft, refused to protect their employees, all while patting themselves on the back for handling the situation. I remember thinking how strange it was that stealing company time or office supplies would get you disciplined immediately, but stealing from coworkers was treated like an unfortunate misunderstanding. With my lunches gone, my only option was the vending machine. and calling those shrink-wrapped ham and cheese sandwiches food felt like an insult to actual nourishment. The bread was dry and stiff. The meat smelled wrong even before you opened the plastic, and the mayo sat there in this translucent, glue-like smear that made your stomach turn. But hunger has a way of lowering standards, and I ate them anyway, sitting alone at my desk, chewing mechanically, feeling more like a cog than a person. Every bite tasted like defeat, like I was paying for someone else's cruelty, while management watched from a distance and did nothing. At home, I vented to my wife constantly, replaying the thefts, the HR conversations, the helplessness, and she listened patiently every time, trying to calm me down, reminding me that it was just lunch, suggesting maybe I should pack simpler food for a while to discourage the thief. Her logic made sense, but something about it felt wrong to me. Like I was being asked to shrink myself, to lower my standards, to surrender something I enjoyed, just because someone else couldn't behave like a decent human being. Still, I nodded along because arguing felt exhausting, and part of me hoped she was right. What made everything worse was the growing paranoia, the feeling that someone was always watching me, judging my reactions, measuring how far they could push before I broke. Every time someone walked past my desk, every time I heard laughter from the break room, every time I saw someone eating something that looked suspiciously good, my mind spiraled. I started scanning faces, replaying interactions, wondering who had the opportunity, who had the nerve, who enjoyed this enough to keep going. It's unsettling how quickly a workplace can stop feeling safe when trust disappears. At one point, I even started thinking about elaborate ways to catch the thief. Traps, decoys, fake lunches, but every idea fizzled out before it became real. Either because I didn't want to get in trouble or because I was just too tired to care. Being worn down like that is its own kind of violence. Not dramatic, not loud, just a constant erosion of energy and dignity until you start accepting things you shouldn't. Looking back, that's probably what the thief was counting on. Then suddenly, the world shut down, offices closed, and we were sent home to work remotely. And almost overnight, the lunch saga vanished from my life. No fridge, no break room, no stolen meals. For months and months I worked from home in pajamas, ate in my own kitchen, and slowly forgot what it felt like to brace myself every day for something to be taken. Life shifted in bigger, more dramatic ways, and compared to everything happening globally, a lunch thief felt insignificant, like a problem from another lifetime. But during that time, something else happened that cut much deeper. My marriage fell apart. Stress, distance, change, all of it piled up. And by the time offices started talking about returning, my wife and I were no longer together. So when I finally put on a button-up shirt again, packed a lunch for the first day back, and drove to the office feeling older, heavier, and emotionally raw, I wasn't prepared for what awaited me. I walked into the break room on that first day back, tired from small talk, stiff from sitting in an office chair again, emotionally drained from everything I'd lost. Opened the fridge and saw empty space where my lunch should have been. That was it. That was the moment everything I'd been holding back finally crashed down on me at once. It felt cruel, almost mocking. Like the universe was reminding me that even after everything I'd been through, someone still felt entitled to take from me. I remember my vision narrowing, my heart pounding, my hands trembling as I stood there staring at that same stupid memo still taped to the wall. That same reminder that no one was responsible, that I was alone in this. And for the first time, I didn't feel sad or embarrassed or resigned. I felt rage pure and blinding, not the kind that makes you scream, but the kind that sharpens your thoughts and tells you something has to change. I stormed out of the break room that day knowing one thing with absolute certainty. I was done asking for help, done waiting for fairness, and done playing by rules that only applied to people who respected them. Because if the system wasn't going to protect me, then I was going to protect myself. And the next time someone touched my lunch, it wouldn't end quietly. That night after my lunch disappeared on the first day back, I didn't sleep properly. I kept replaying the moment in my head. The empty fridge shelf, the stale smell of the break room, that stupid memo still taped to the wall like a quiet insult, and the overwhelming feeling that nothing in my life was stable anymore. My marriage was over. My routine was shattered. And now this one small thing, this one tiny comfort I'd brought with me into the office, was being taken again as if to remind me that I had no control over anything. Somewhere between midnight and morning, something inside me hardened, not into anger exactly, but into resolve. I wasn't going to complain anymore. I wasn't going to hope HR suddenly grew a backbone. And I wasn't going to let this keep happening. While I swallowed my frustration like it was normal, I realized something uncomfortable but freeing. The system had already made its stance clear. HR had told me directly that lunches were personal property and theft wasn't their concern unless it escalated into something they couldn't ignore. That meant the responsibility, whether fair or not, had been quietly handed to me. And once you accept that no one is coming to save you, your thinking changes. You stop asking, why is this happening? And start asking, how do I end it? That shift is dangerous, but it's also powerful. I started paying attention in ways I never had before. Not obsessively at first, but deliberately. Who took lunch at what time? Who lingered in the break room? Who always seemed too comfortable around the fridge? I noticed how some people avoided eating in public, while others treated the break room like their personal cafeteria. I noticed how certain coworkers always ate early, others late, and how some people never seemed worried about whether their food would still be there. That confidence stuck out to me. Confidence like that doesn't come from luck. It comes from knowing you won't get caught. Slowly, patterns formed. The thief never struck randomly anymore. They avoided times when I was likely to be around. They didn't take food when the break room was crowded. They took lunches that were clearly labeled and clearly better than average. This wasn't desperation, it was entitlement. Whoever it was didn't see this as stealing. They saw it as a perk, something they deserved because no one had stopped them yet. And that realization made my skin crawl, because it meant this person didn't feel guilty at all. At the same time, doubt gnawed at me. What if I was wrong? What if I accused the wrong person? What if I embarrassed myself or got fired over something everyone else had already dismissed as trivial? That fear kept me frozen for days, stuck between wanting justice and wanting safety. Offices don't reward people who rock the boat, and I knew that better than most. But every time I considered letting it go, I pictured that empty fridge shelf again, and the humiliation came rushing back. The idea didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, quietly, almost innocently. I thought about how the thief operated, how bold they were, how they relied on the assumption that no one would ever confront them directly. Then I thought about HR, about their lunch bags sitting in that same fridge, untouched, unbothered, like some unspoken symbol of authority. And that's when something clicked. If the thief trusted the system, then the system could be used as bait. I wrestled with the morality of it longer than I expected. I wasn't a thief. I'd never taken anything that wasn't mine. The idea of touching someone else's lunch made my stomach twist. But then I remembered HR's exact words. Personal property, not the company's responsibility. By their own logic, moving a lunch wasn't theft. It was a personal matter. That logic had protected the thief for months. Now it was going to expose them. The next morning, I packed an empty lunch bag. No food, no note. Just an ordinary brown bag with my name written on it in the same bold marker as before. My hands shook slightly as I placed it in the fridge. Not because I was scared of getting caught, but because I knew that once I started this, there was no going back. This wasn't a complaint anymore. It was a trap. I waited until the break room was empty, listened carefully for footsteps, then quietly removed the HR representative's lunch bag from the fridge. It was plain, unmarked, confident in its anonymity. I transferred its contents into my bag, careful not to spill anything, careful not to damage anything, and discarded their empty bag without ceremony. Now on the shelf, it looked like HR's lunch belonged to me. My name, my bag, my bait. I knew this was a massive risk. The entire plan depended on one assumption, that the thief avoided eating around me specifically, not everyone else. If I was wrong, nothing would happen. If I was right, everything would. That uncertainty sat heavy in my chest as I sealed the fridge and walked away like nothing had changed. To make it believable, I went all in. I told co-workers loudly that I had an off-site meeting and wouldn't be back until late afternoon. I made sure people heard me. I packed up my things. I even moved my car from the office parking lot to a side street a few blocks away so anyone checking would see it gone. It felt ridiculous, like I was in some low-budget spy movie. But details matter when you're dealing with someone who's been getting away with things for a long time. I came back through the building's back stairwell hours later, heart pounding harder than I expected, and sat just outside the break room where I couldn't be seen, but could hear everything. Time stretched painfully. Every laugh, every footstep, every microwave beep made my pulse spike. I started doubting myself again, wondering if I'd gone too far, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. Then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of confrontation, a confused voice, then anger, then disbelief. Someone said, "What the hell, that's my lunch." Another voice responded casually, almost offensively, "Nah, it's got his name on it." I felt this electric rush surge through me, because in that moment I knew, without seeing anything, that it had worked. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, listening as footsteps moved away from the break room toward an office down the hall. And I knew that behind that closed door, the truth was finally unraveling. The thief had taken the bait. HR had been forced to see the theft firsthand, and nothing would ever be swept under the rug again. Sitting in that stairwell, barely breathing, I felt time stretch in a way I'd never experienced before, every second dragging itself out like it knew. Something irreversible was happening on the other side of that wall. I could hear muffled voices now, not clear enough to make out words, but sharp enough to recognize tone. Confusion turning into irritation. Irritation turning into authority. The kind of authority HR uses when they suddenly realize they're personally involved. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid it would give me away. But I stayed still, because this was the moment I had been unconsciously building toward for months. Later, piecing it together from what people told me, the scene played out almost perfectly. The HR representative had walked into the break room expecting a normal lunch, routine, uneventful, only to see someone already standing there with a bag in hand. They recognized the container immediately. Same lid, same color, same food they'd packed that morning. And without even thinking, they said it out loud. Loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "What the hell, that's my lunch." The response came back casual, dismissive, almost amused. "Nah, it's not. Look at the bag. It's got his name on it." That was the moment the room went quiet. Because suddenly it wasn't a joke anymore. It wasn't an accident. It was a direct challenge. The HR rep demanded the bag back. And when they grabbed it and saw my name written clearly across the front, something shifted in the room. Authority doesn't like being confused, and it hates being wrong even more. What had started as an everyday lunch break instantly turned into an investigation. And the HR rep didn't argue, didn't accuse publicly. They did something far more telling. They told him to come with them to their office. In that single sentence, the power dynamics flipped. Because now it wasn't about lunch anymore. It was about policy, theft, and reputation. That walk down the hallway might not sound dramatic, but in an office, it's everything. People noticed. Conversations stopped. Eyes followed. Whispers started almost immediately. Everyone knew something serious was happening because HR never escorts people anywhere casually. The lunch thief Kyle walked behind them, shoulders tense, face tight, probably replaying every stolen meal in his head, realizing too late that his little game had finally crossed the wrong person. Not long after I got the call, HR wanted to see me. My stomach twisted as I stood up, because no matter how justified I felt, there's always fear when authority finally turns its attention on you. I walked into that office expecting anger, maybe even discipline, but what I saw instead was something far more satisfying: discomfort. The HR rep looked unsettled, like someone who had just discovered a mess they'd helped create. They told me they were aware of my break room hijinks, the phrase alone making it clear they were trying to regain control of the narrative. And they reminded me that it was against policy to move another employee's lunch. I nodded, biting my tongue so hard it almost hurt, because every instinct in me wanted to repeat their own words back to them, that lunches were personal property and the company wasn't responsible for lost or stolen items. They didn't need me to say it, though, because the irony was hanging in the room, thick and undeniable. They confirmed what I already knew. They had identified the lunch thief, and the situation was being handled internally. No names officially, no details shared. But it didn't matter because the damage was already done. Kyle had been exposed in the most public way possible, caught red-handed by the one department he assumed would always protect him. There was no spinning that, no pretending it was a misunderstanding. By the end of the day, everyone knew. Offices are faster than social media when it comes to spreading information. And the story moved from desk to desk with incredible speed. The same people who'd laughed off missing lunches months earlier were suddenly furious, connecting dots, remembering patterns, realizing how many times they'd gone hungry because one person thought he was entitled to whatever he wanted. Kyle didn't just lose his anonymity. He lost everyone's respect. What made it even sweeter was learning that Kyle had been in line for a promotion, a good one, the kind that changes how people see you at work. That promotion disappeared quietly, indefinitely postponed, which in corporate language usually means permanently dead. No announcement, no explanation, just gone. The thief who thought stealing lunches was harmless suddenly learned how expensive small actions can be. Meanwhile, I started getting nods of approval, quiet comments, people thanking me for finally putting an end to something that had bothered them for months. HR even hinted that I'd helped them identify an issue, as if they hadn't dismissed it entirely before. I let them have their version of events. I didn't need the credit. I didn't need the praise. Watching the system finally acknowledge what I'd known all along was enough. Walking back to my desk that day felt different, lighter, like something heavy I'd been carrying had finally been set down. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small or powerless. I felt seen, validated, not because I'd won, but because the truth had finally been forced into the open, where it couldn't be ignored anymore. But as satisfying as that day was, the real victory didn't hit until later, when I opened the fridge again and realized something simple but profound. My lunch was still there, untouched, and for the first time in months, I could finally eat in peace. The strange thing about revenge, the kind that actually works, is that it's never loud at the end. There's no applause, no dramatic music swelling in the background, no one announcing that justice has officially been served. Instead, it arrives quietly, almost shyly, like a deep breath you didn't realize you'd been holding for months, finally being released. The day after everything went down, I walked into the office expecting something to feel different, expecting tension or awkwardness or maybe even guilt, but what I felt instead was calm. A calm so unfamiliar it took me a moment to recognize it. I placed my lunch in the fridge that morning without hesitation, without checking over my shoulder, without writing my name bigger than necessary. And when lunchtime came, it was still there. That sounds small, almost laughable, but in that moment it felt monumental. It wasn't just food sitting on a shelf. It was proof that the rules of the environment had finally been restored, that boundaries existed again, that I wasn't powerless anymore. I ate slowly that day, not rushing, not distracted, savoring not just the meal, but the peace that came with it. Kyle didn't disappear overnight, but he might as well have. The confidence he used to carry evaporated completely. He stopped lingering in the break room, stopped making eye contact, stopped joking with people like nothing mattered. Where he used to move through the office comfortably, he now moved carefully, like someone suddenly aware that everyone around them knows exactly who they are. It's incredible how quickly entitlement turns into shame. When the safety net vanishes, people didn't confront him directly, they didn't need to. Silence did the job for them. Conversations stopped when he approached. Lunch invitations dried up. The casual friendliness he once enjoyed was replaced by polite distance, the kind that stings more than open hostility. Every stolen lunch he'd enjoyed in private had accumulated interest, and now he was paying it back socially, one uncomfortable day at a time. HR, of course, never apologized. They never acknowledged that dismissing the complaints had allowed the problem to grow. Instead, they subtly rewrote history. Suddenly, they were more present in the break room. Suddenly, there were reminders about respecting co-workers' property. Suddenly, theft was taken seriously. It was frustrating but also revealing. Institutions rarely admit fault, but they change behavior when they're exposed. And that change alone was enough to tell me I'd been right all along. What surprised me most was how much emotional weight lifted once this was over. I hadn't realized how deeply the situation had affected me until it ended. The constant vigilance, the daily disappointment, the humiliation of being dismissed, all of it had seeped into other areas of my life. When that pressure disappeared, I found myself breathing easier, sleeping better, even engaging more openly with coworkers again. It was proof that small injustices, when repeated, can cause very real damage. Looking back, the most disturbing part wasn't the theft itself. It was how easily it was allowed to happen. One person took advantage because they could, because they learned early on that no one would stop them. Power doesn't always look like authority or titles. Sometimes it looks like confidence built on other people's silence. Once that silence breaks, that power collapses immediately. I didn't do this for praise. I didn't do it to feel superior. I did it because something unfair was happening and every official path had failed. When systems refuse to protect people, they quietly encourage the worst behavior. My plan didn't break rules, it exposed hypocrisy. And sometimes that's the only language institutions understand. The real victory wasn't watching Kyle lose his promotion or reputation. As satisfying as that was, the real victory was reclaiming something simple that had been taken from me again and again, my sense of dignity. Being able to bring something I cared about to work without fear. Being able to trust the environment again. Those things matter more than people realize until they're gone. If there's one thing I hope you take from this story, it's this: small injustices are never actually small. They're tests. Tests to see how much you'll tolerate. Tests to see whether you'll stay quiet. And every time you let one slide because it's not worth it, someone learns that they can push a little further next time. Standing up for yourself doesn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes it means patience, strategy, and letting people expose themselves. I still pack lunches. I still use the same fridge. And every time I open it and see my food right where I left it, I'm reminded that fairness doesn't arrive on its own. Sometimes you have to force it into the light. Not with shouting, not with threats, but with calm, deliberate action that leaves no room for denial. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of a time someone crossed a line and thought they'd get away with it, then smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments. What's the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed or experienced? Because stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're reminders that even quiet people have breaking points. And when they're pushed far enough, justice has a way of finding its mark.